Here is where you can enter your creation to the jam. When submission closes, your creation will be voted on.
anyone there? Hi. Survive. Somebody new. Anyone else? A few. On a lonely night. Once a burning light. 100 leaders would be born of you. Since you've awakened her again, she depends.
Another way of customizing your puppet's appearance is by changing its color. We can do this by tinting it in coat mode. If you've played my tutorial on coat, style and effects, you'll already know how to do this. In the assembly menu, go to the modes menu and enter coat mode. In the coat mode menu, open the colors menu and select a color for your puppet. Now hover over your puppet and hold R2 to tint it with your selected color. The longer you hold R2, the stronger the tint will become. If you want your puppet to be multicolored, simply scope into the puppet. Select a different color from the colors menu. Hover your imp over a part of the puppet you want to tint. How about the head? Now, when you press and hold R2, just that part of the puppet will be tinted. You can also use the tools in Style mode and Effects mode. Try using Style mode to change the texture of your puppet. If you don't know how to use Style mode, there's an art tutorial which can help you. In the next step, we'll dive into the dressing up box. One of the simplest ways to customize a puppet is by adding accessories. But to make sure they move with the puppet, we need to group them with a body part. Before we do that, it's important to fully understand the concept of scoping in and out of groups and objects. If you've played part 4 of the Start Dreaming tutorials, then you'll already know a thing or two about using groups. Objects in dreams are often combined into groups, which can be treated like a single object in assembly mode. Groups themselves can also be grouped. This means that you can have groups nested inside other groups. Let's try scoping in and out of something else before we invade the puppet's personal space. Over there on the floor is a hat box. Make sure you're in edit mode. Now try taking the lid off the hat box. The whole box will move because the lid, the box, and its contents have been grouped. Undo the move with the left directional button to put it back in its place. Now scope into the group. Hover over the hat box, press and hold L1 and press X. Everything but the box should go grey and blurry. If not, make sure your visual feedback preference is set to all. This shows that you've scoped into the group and can edit its contents. Now you should be able to take the lid off the hat box. Inside is another hat box. Try taking the lid off this one. I think you can guess what will happen. This smaller hat box is also grouped with its lid and contents. Remove the smaller box and place it next to the large one. Now scope into this group by holding L1 and pressing X over the smaller hat box. The original hat box will go grey and blurry as we've scoped into a subgroup. Now you should be able to open the smaller hat box. What's inside? A lovely hat. Take it out and place it next to the smaller box. When you've done that, proceed to the next step. Now that we've taken the hat out of the box, let's try putting it on our puppet. First, we need to scope out of this group. To do that, simply hold L1 and press circle. That takes us back into the large hat box group. Now scope out again into the main scene by holding L1 and pressing circle. Pick up the hat. We seem to have a bit of a problem here. The hat is still inside the nested groups, even though it's outside the hat box. When you scope in and out, only you and your imp are moving in and out of objects or groups. Unless you're carrying something with you. Scope back into the large hat box group, and then into the smaller hat box group to get the hat. Now grab and hold the hat with R2, and scope out of both groups with L1 and circle while holding the hat. If you've done it correctly, you should be back in the main scene. With a hat you can now move independently of the boxes. That's because scoping in and out of a group whilst holding an object adds or removes it from that group. Hurrah! Now we can put it on the puppet. Grab the hat, hover over the puppet, then hold L1 and press X to scope into the puppet with the hat. Now scope into the puppet's head while still holding the hat. This is a shortcut for grouping two objects if you're already grabbing one of them. Simply grab an object and scope into another object to group them automatically without having to select them. The same way that scoping into a group while holding an object adds it to the group. Now that it's in a group with the head, place the hat where you want it. Remember to check it from different angles using the grab cam to make sure it's in position. Press R2 softly to nudge if you need to make fine adjustments to the position of the hat. Before you move on, you should try out the puppet to see it walk around with its new accessory. Switch to play mode. Possess it with R2 and take it for a wander. Nice. When you're ready to continue, go back to edit mode. Going to play mode and back to edit mode will scope you out of any groups. Remember to rewind. Nice. Switch to play mode, possess it with R2 and take it for a... Press scope in. This is... Now scope into the puppet's head while still holding the hat. This is a shortcut for grouping two objects if you're already grabbing one of them. Simply grab an object and scope into another object to group them automatically without having to select them. The same way that scoping into a group while holding an object adds scope into... This is... Now scope into the puppet's head while still holding the hat. Grab the hat, hover over the puppet, then hold L1 and press X to scope into the puppet with the hat. Now scope into the puppet's head while still holding the hat. This is a shortcut for grouping two objects if you're already grabbing one of them. Simply grab an object and scope into another object to group them automatically without having to select them. The same way that scoping into a group while holding an object adds it to the group. Now that it's in a group with the head, place the hat where you want it. Remember to check it from different angles using the grab cam to make sure it's in position. Press R2 softly to nudge if you need to make fine adjustments to the position of the hat. Before you move on, you should try out the puppet to see it walk around with its new accessory. Switch to play mode, possess it with R2 and take it for a wander. Nice. When you're ready to continue, go back to edit mode. Going to play mode and back to edit mode will scope you out of any groups. Remember to rewind time with L3 to get your puppet back in position. Then go to the next step. Okay, let's add some more accessories before our puppet's stage debut. Open the assembly menu and select Search, the button with the magnifying glass, to search for an element. Usually, you'd be in the Dreamiverse here, but for this tutorial, I've kept things simple and curated a collection of elements for you to use. Take a look at some of the accessories in the collection. Select one you like with X. You'll now have your chosen accessory on your imp. Don't stamp it down yet, though. First, we need to scope into the puppet. You can do this even when you have an element from the Dreamiverse on your imp. Scope in with L1 and X, and then scope into the body part that you want to attach it to. If that body part is already in its own group, you'll enter that group. But if the body part is just a sculpture, then you'll create a new group when you stamp the object down. Once the accessory is in the group, you can adjust the accessory while you're there. Try adding some more accessories from the collection. Then it's important to test the puppet in play mode to check that the accessory is attached correctly. Here's another very important tip. If you ever want to remove an accessory, whatever you do, don't ungroup the body part. If you do that, you'll delete that group's connection to the puppet. And without the connector, your puppet's limbs will start falling off when you go into play mode. And nobody wants that. Instead, scope into the group containing the body part and the accessory. Then either delete the accessory or grab it and scope out. If there's only one object left in the group, it'll automatically ungroup, and the connector will remain safely connected to the remaining object. Play around with the things you've learned in this tutorial and have fun making a character. When you're happy, select the star podium from the tutorial collection and stamp it down in the outline that we've put in the scene for you. Then head back into play mode, jump onto the podium and see what Connie thinks of your creation. Okay, let's add some More accessories been us here. Scope into within its object. Here's that group's connection to the puppet, and nobody wants that. Instead, scope into the group containing the body part and the accessory. When you're happy, play around with the things you've learned in this tutorial and have fun making a character. When you're happy, select the star podium from the tutorial collection and stamp it down in the outline that we've put in the scene for you. Then head back into play mode, jump onto the podium, and see what Connie thinks of your creation. Oh dear, it looks like Cuthbert is really stuck this time. In previous tutorials, you've edited the scene to help Connie reach Cuthbert. But this time, you'll be editing Connie herself, supercharging her with some new abilities to get past the obstacles in the scene. Bear in mind that this is a complex tutorial in which it's easy to make a mistake. If you do, remember to use the left directional button to undo. Now go into play mode and see how far you can get. Possess Connie with R2 and press the X button to jump. Oops, she can't even get over the first obstacle. So let's start by souping up her jump height. Switch back to edit mode and we'll get started. To change Connie's jump height, all we need to do is tweak her. So hover over her, hold L1 and press the square button to open her tweak menu. This is a puppet tweak menu. As you can see, it's jam-packed with different options. Thankfully, the setting we want is on the first page. All these settings control Connie's overall movement. We could make Connie run super fast or super slow. But nah, that's not going to help her. A nice high jump is what we need. What do we have here? This slider controls Connie's jump height. Hover over it with your imp and hold X to grab it. Move your imp to adjust the slider to around 3 meters. That should be enough to get over that stack of blocks. The Puppet Tweak menu also has some really useful testing controls. Click R3 to start time, and Connie will come to life. See what happens now if you hover your imp over the jump height slider. You can preview the jump, so you can get it to the perfect height without having to test it in play mode. Actually, I think you should dial it back to 2.5 meters, or she might overshoot the jump. You can make small adjustments to sliders by using the up and down directional buttons. Hover over the slider and use the down directional button to adjust the setting. Dial it back to jump to low. Also has some to around 3 meters. That should be enough to get over that stack of blocks. The Puppet Tweak menu also has some really useful testing controls. Click R3 to start time, and Connie will come to life. See what happens now if you hover your imp over the jump height slider. You can preview the jump, so you can get it to the perfect height without having to test it in play mode. Actually, I think you should dial it back to 2.5 meters, or she might overshoot the jump. You can make small adjustments to sliders by using the up and down directional buttons. Hover over the slider and use the down directional button to adjust the setting. Feel free to explore some of the other settings in the menu. If you're not sure what a button or slider does, just hover over it for a Few seconds and a more info tip will pop up to explain. You can even adjust the strength of gravity on her jump. Turn it down a bit to make her jump more floaty. When you've got Connie's jump the way you want it, give it a test run in play mode. See how far Connie can get now, then move on to the next step when you're ready to continue. Well, that was pretty cool. Unfortunately, Connie's new jumping skills aren't going to be much use on the next obstacle. And don't even think about making her jump over the top, because that force field will zap her in a second. Instead, let's give Connie the power to crouch. I bet she's always dreamed of it. If you're still in play mode, switch back to edit mode now. Rewind time with L3 to put Connie back at the start. To give her a crouch, we need to scope into her. Puppets are made up of sculptures, connectors, and gadgets that are grouped together. Hover over Connie, press and hold L1, then press X to scope in. When you've scoped into a puppet, you can see its inner workings. On Connie's back, there's a microchip gadget. It's called Connie's brain, and it contains all her logic and animations. Let's take a look inside. Hold L1 and press X over it to scope in and open the microchip canvas. There's quite a lot going on in here. The gadget I want you to look at is this one in the bottom right corner with the diamond icon. This is a keyframe gadget. If you've played through the Keyframes and Timelines tutorial, you'll already know all about these. Keyframes record changes to things in the scene. They store those changes in a gadget, which can be triggered using logic. This keyframe contains a crouching pose for Connie. Select the keyframe with X, and you'll see a preview of how it looks. Those dashed lines over Connie show that she's being changed by the keyframe. Press circle to deselect the keyframe and she goes back to normal. To be able to activate the crouch keyframe, we need to connect it to Connie's controller sensor. Then you'll be able to make her crouch with a controller button. In the next step, I'll show you how to do exactly that. To activate the crouch, we're going to connect it to Connie's controller sensor. If you've closed her microchip, scope back into her and then scope into the microchip to open it up again. The controller sensor is the large gadget on Connie's microchip. It has a controller icon on it. Open up its tweak menu with L1 and square. Now you have a microchip and a tweak menu open, you may need to arrange them on the screen. Make sure that the controller sensor and its tweak menu stay to the left. This is because they generate signals, and signals flow through gadgets from left to right in Dreams. You can also save the 3D space position screen. It's the large gadget on Connie's microchip. It has a controller icon on it. Open up its tweak menu with L1 and square. Now you have a microchip and a tweak menu open, you may need to arrange them on the screen. Make sure that the controller sensor and its tweak menu stay to the left. This is because they generate signals, and signals flow through gadgets from left to right in Dreams. You can also save the 3D space position of tweak menus and microchips, or pin them to the screen, using the buttons that appear at the top when hovering over the canvas. This will help you keep them tidy while you're editing logic, which is very important as it's easy to make mistakes. Now, let's take a closer look at that controller sensor. Ah, look, controller buttons. Just what we need. All playable characters contain a controller sensor gadget like this one. But the gadget can also be used for any situation where you want to detect button presses. To assign our keyframe to a button, we just need to wire it to the controller sensor. We won't use a circle button as that depossesses Connie, and X makes her jump. So how about the square button to crouch? Make sure you can see the keyframe on the microchip. Move the tweak menu with R2 if you need to. If you hover over the square button in the controller sensor menu, you'll see ports appear on either side of it. They're just like the ports you see on gadgets. Ports on the left are inputs, and ports on the right are outputs. Now, you need to be very precise for the next part, as it's easy to make a mistake. Carefully hover your imp over the output port of the square button, and press X to create a wire. Stretch that wire over to the keyframe, and connect it to the power port on the bottom of the gadget with X. If at any time you make a mistake, just undo it using the left directional button. Once your crouch move is all wired up, close the controller sensor tweak menu. Hover over it, hold L1, then press circle to close. Now try out Connie's new crouch in play mode. See if she can make it under the second obstacle. When you're ready to continue, go back to edit mode. Rewind time with L3 and start the next step. Right, we're on to the final obstacle. There's no way around it, but it looks destructible. So we're going to make a slam attack for Connie so that she can smash through it. We'll start by recording a pose for the slam. We can do this using a keyframe. Scope back into Connie and open up her microchip if it isn't already open. If you've played my Keyframes and Timelines tutorial, you'll have a bit of a head start on this next part. Go to the Assembly menu and open the Animate menu. Select the keyframe with X. You'll now have a keyframe gadget on your imp. Stamp it somewhere in the scene with R2 or X. The keyframe records changes you make to objects and settings in the scene. It starts recording as soon as you stamp it. You can tell it's recording because your imp will change shape and colour. Now that we're recording, grab Connie's upper body with R2 and drag it gently down to the floor. Because we're scoped into her, we can move her body parts individually to create a pose. If we weren't scoped in, right, we're on to the final obstacle. There's no way around it, but it looks destructible. So we're going to make a slam attack for Connie so that she can smash through it. We'll start by recording a pose for the slam. We can do this using a keyframe. Scope back into Connie and open up her microchip if it isn't already open. If you've played my Keyframes and Timelines tutorial, you'll have a bit of a head start on this next part. Go to the Assembly menu and open the Animate menu. Select the keyframe with X. You'll now have a keyframe gadget on your imp. Stamp it somewhere in the scene with R2 or X. The keyframe records changes you make to objects and settings in the scene. It starts recording as soon as you stamp it. You can tell it's recording because your imp will change shape and colour. Now that we're recording, grab Connie's upper body with R2 and drag it gently down to the floor. Because we're scoped into her, we can move her body parts individually to create a pose. If we weren't scoped in, we'd move Connie's whole body. Notice that her knees automatically bend. Make sure her cone is all the way down to the floor so that you can't see her legs. Keyframes can record changes to anything, even tweak menu settings. So, just for visual flair, let's also make her glow. Hover over Connie's cone, hold L1 and press square to open its tweak menu. Because we're scoped in, this opens the tweak menu for the sculpture itself, rather than the puppet L1. So, just for visual flair, let's also make her glow. Hover over Connie's cone, hold L1 and press square to open its tweak menu. Because we're scoped in, this opens the tweak menu for the sculpture itself, rather than the puppet. All the settings on this page change the way Connie's cone looks. Look for the glow slider on the first page. Its icon is a sun. Raise the glow up to about 40%. Once you've set the glow, select Stop Recording in the context menu to store the changes to the keyframe. You can close the tweak menu now too. Just hover over it, hold L1 and press circle. Select the keyframe gadget with X to preview what's been recorded. Looks good. Deselect the keyframe by pressing circle. In the next step, we'll continue building Connie's slam attack. The next step is to place our new Connie animation into a timeline. Using a timeline will let us time the animations and effects of the slam attack. Go to the Assembly menu and back to the Animate menu. Select the timeline with X. Hover over Connie's microchip and stamp a timeline above the crouch keyframe. Now let's open the timeline canvas with L1 and X. The slam attack should be a really quick animation. So adjust the canvas so it's only 1 second long. Any longer and it won't feel snappy enough. Hover over the edge of the timeline canvas so that a white line appears along it. You'll also see a white double-ended arrow appear next to the edge by your imp. When you see this, grab the edge of the canvas with X. Move your imp to shorten the timeline to 1 second. Make sure you don't select the trim button by mistake. It's a square button by the numbers at the top of the timeline. It has a black arrow on it. The timeline duration is now correct, but the space is very small. So let's zoom in a bit. Hover your imp over the timeline canvas, hold L1 and press the right directional button to zoom in. This will keep the timeline duration to 1 second long, but stretch the space so that you can fit more detail into it. If you need to zoom out, just hold L1 and press the left directional button. Now let's put our Slam Attack keyframe onto the timeline. Grab the keyframe with R2 and place it at the start of the timeline canvas. Make sure you've got the Slam keyframe and not the crouch one. The gadget automatically starts the timeline canvas. Make sure you've got the Slam keyframe and not the crouch one. The gadget automatically snaps to the surface of the canvas. The keyframe is only a fraction of a second long at the moment, but we need it to fill the length of the timeline. So hover over the keyframe and hold the up directional button to scale it. Make it the same length as the timeline. Now we want to wire the timeline up to a button press, just like we did with the crouch. Move the timeline canvas so that you can see the controller sensor and the timeline gadget. Open the controller sensor tweak menu with L1 like we did. Make it the same length as the timeline. Now, make it the same length as the timeline. Now we want to wire the timeline up to a button press, just like we did with the crouch. Move the timeline, but we need it to fill the length of the timeline. So hover over the keyframe and hold the up directional button to scale it. Make it the same length as the timeline. Now we want to wire the timeline up to a button press, just like we did with the crouch. Move the timeline canvas so that you can see the controller sensor and the timeline gadget. Open the controller sensor tweak menu with L1 and square. I'm going to use L1 as the Slam Attack button. Open like we did with the crouch. Move the timeline canvas so that you can see the controller sensor and the timeline gadget. Open the controller sensor tweak menu with L1 and square. I'm going to use L1 as the Slam Attack button. Hover over the output port of the L1 button and press X to create a wire. Stretch the wire down to the timeline gadget and connect it to the power port on the bottom. You can now use the L1 button to perform Connie's Slam Attack. Give it a try in play mode. At the moment, it's just an animation, so it's not going to do anything to the blocks. But in the next step, I'll show you how to add some force to it. When you're ready to continue, return to edit mode, rewind time, and start the next step. The slam attack animation is all set up, but it's not doing much besides looking cool, so we need to add a gadget to our timeline that will emit a force when Connie slams the ground. The gadget we're going to use for this is the force applier. Go to the Assembly menu and open the Gadgets menu. Find the Move as an Output menu and open it with X. The icon for the force applier looks like a gust of wind. Select it with X to equip it to your imp. Equip it. Go to the Assembly menu and open the Gadgets menu. Find the Move as an Output menu and open it with X. The icon for the force applier looks like a gust of wind. Select it with X to equip it to your imp. I hope you've still got the timeline open. If not, open it with L1 and X. Stamp the force applier onto the timeline canvas below the keyframe. Press circle to unequip the force applier from your imp. The force applier isn't very strong by default, so we'll need to tweak it. To open its tweak menu, hover over the gadget, hold L1 and press square. At the top of the tweak menu is the Force Strength slider. Its icon is a beefy arm. Drag it all the way up to 100% using your imp. That will ensure the force emitted will overcome the gravity in the scene and the friction between the blocks. Next, increase the force speed to 10 meters per second. That will give the slam attack some punch. If you take a look at Connie, you'll see a green zone around her. Anything in this zone will be affected by the force applier. At the moment, the zone isn't much bigger than Connie. Hover your imp over the zone and arrow gizmos will appear. Grab them with R2 and move your imp to change the size of the zone. Or you can scale the zone more precisely in the Force Applier Tweak menu. Go to the tab called Zone Size. Grab the zone size slider with X and set it to about 3.5 meters. OK, let's test out Connie's new powers. Switch over to Play mode. Possess Connie and give her new slam attack a try. Oops! Looks like it's more power than Connie can handle. The force applier is pushing her off the platform. Switch back to edit mode and rewind time. In the final step, I'll show you how to tweak the force applier so that it only affects the objects we want it to. To prevent the force applier from pushing Connie off the platforms, we're going to use labels. Labels can be given to any object in the scene, and gadgets like the force applier can detect them. In the Force Applier Tweak menu, go to the Labels tab. By default, it will detect all labels. There are labels for all sorts of objects: foes, scenery, targets. The friend label is used for playable characters like Connie or friendly characters like Cuthbert. So if we deselect it, the force applier will no longer affect Connie. Hover over the Friend button and press X to deselect it. It's the button with the heart icon. Now Connie should be able to blast through the blocks without firing and detect them. Labels can be given to any object in the scene, and gadgets like the Force Applier can detect them. In the Force Applier Tweak menu, go to the Labels tab. By default, it will detect all labels. There are labels for all sorts of objects: foes, scenery, targets. The Friend label is used for playable characters like Connie or friendly characters like Cuthbert. So if we deselect it, the Force Applier will no longer affect Connie. Hover over the Friend button and press X to deselect it. It's the button with the heart icon. Now Connie should be able to blast through the blocks without firing herself off into space. Use her new skills to pass all the obstacles. And you can use your new skills to create some characters for your scenes. When you've successfully rescued Cuthbert, go through the door to finish this tutorial.
For this logic tutorial, I've created a jumping challenge for Connie and Cuthbert. Looks like Cuthbert's feeling confident. Oh, better luck next time, Cuthbert. Let's see how Connie gets on. When Connie jumps on a platform, she'll only have a few seconds to get to the next one before it disappears. But to give the game some replay value, we're going to create some scoring logic. See that microchip on the side of the start platform? Open it up with L1 and X. This is where we'll build the scoring logic. These trigger zones detect when Connie crosses the start and finish lines. If Connie falls, the health modifier will trigger this global settings gadget to reset the scene. So Connie can try again, and all the platforms will be back in place. It'll be up to you to fill in the rest. Keeping score in a scene is done using a score gadget. Go to the assembly menu and select Gadgets. Open up Gameplay Gear with X and find the score gadget. It looks like a prize sticker with 100 on it. Make sure you don't grab the score modifier by mistake. Stamp a score gadget onto the microchip next to the finish line trigger zone. Then unequip the gadget with the circle button. Start the next step when you're ready to start setting up the score gadget. Let's take a look at the score's tweak menu. Open it up with L1 and square. It's a pretty simple gadget. You can rename the gadget by selecting the name at the top. This is really important if you have more than one score in the scene, but we can leave this score with its default name. At the bottom of the tweak menu, find the button with the score icon on it. Hover over it and you'll see it's called Post Score. When this button receives a signal, it will post the current score. But post it where? Well, if your scene is placed in a dream, the score will be displayed on the scoreboard for that dream. The score for this scene should be posted when Connie crosses the finish line. So let's use the finish line trigger zone to activate it. Create a wire from the detected output port of the finish line trigger zone with R2 or X. Extend it over to the score tweak menu, then connect it to the input of the post score button. Now when Connie crosses the finish line, the current score will be posted. Close the tweak menu with L1 and the circle button. This score gadget is all set. In the next step, I'll show you how you can display the score on screen. It's all well and good being able to post a score, but we also want to be able to see it while we're playing. Well, I have a gadget that can help with that. By adding a number displayer to the logic, we can keep a live count of the score. In the assembly menu, select Gadgets. Close the gameplay gear section with the circle button. The number displayer lives in movers and output. Its icon is a screen with some numbers on it. Select it with X. In dreams, logic flows from left to right. So stamp a number displayer to the right of the score gadget. Then unequip it with circle. If you hover your imp over a number displayer gadget, a number appears on the screen. Select the gadget with X and it'll stay there, allowing you to grab and move it with R2. Move the number to where you want the score to display. You can resize the number with the up and down directional buttons. It looks pretty basic right now, but I'll show you how to jazz it up a bit later. First, let's hook it up to the score. Open the score tweak menu with L1 and the square button. Find the button called Current Score, then create a wire from its output port, or tweak menu with L1 and the square button. Find the button called Current Score, then create a wire from its output port. Extend the wire over to the number displayer. On the left edge, there's a port called Number Range. When you plug a wire into this port, its signal will be displayed as a number. And it still says 0. Well, we haven't added anything to the score yet. But you can test that it's working by increasing the initial score slider in the tweak menu. Check that it's working, then set the initial score back to 0. Now close the score tweak menu. In the next step, we'll make the number displayer look a bit fancier. To change the appearance of your number displayer, you need to tweak it. In the tweak menu, there's loads of options for tweaking the appearance of the text, box and border. The first page contains all the text options. At the bottom of the page, you can select the colour, brightness and opacity of the text. You can also choose a different font for the number. Hover over the font slider and use the up and down directional buttons to change the font. On the other pages, you can tweak the appearance of the text box and border. There's lots of options to experiment with, but I'm actually going to turn off the box, border and shadow. On each page, just deselect the buttons with the eye icon to hide them. The tweak menu also has a page for aligning the text. Using these buttons, you can get your text perfectly aligned. I'm putting my score in the middle, at the top. Have a play around with the settings, then close the tweak menu when you're happy with the look of your number displayer. We've now got a snazzy-looking score display. In the next step, I'll show you how you can add to the score. It's all well and good being able to post a score, but tweak menu over it's 0. Score slider in the tweak menu. You can also have options to experiment with, but I'm actually going to turn off the box, border and shadow. On each page, just deselect the buttons with the eye icon to hide them. The tweak menu also has a page for aligning the text. Using these buttons, you can get your text perfectly aligned. I'm putting my score in the middle, at the top. You also just have options to experiment with. But I'm actually going to turn off the box, border and shadow. On each page, just deselect the buttons with the eye icon to hide them. The tweak menu also has a page for aligning the text. Using these buttons, you can get your text perfectly aligned. You also has a page, just deselect the buttons with the eye icon to hide them. The tweak menu also has a page for aligning the text. Using these buttons, you can get your text perfectly aligned. I'm putting my score in the middle, at the top. Have a play around with the settings, then close the tweak menu when you're happy with the look of your number displayer. We've now got a snazzy-looking score display. In the next step, I'll show you how you can add to the score. To make the score go up, we need something for Connie to collect. A prize bubble should do the trick. Prize bubbles are ready-made collectibles you can use in your scenes. Fly over to the first floating platform. Now go to the assembly menu and navigate back to Gadgets. Close Movers and Output with Circle, then open up Gameplay Gear. The prize bubble icon is a gift-wrapped present. Select it with X. Stamp one above the first platform, where Connie can reach it. Then unequip the prize bubble with Circle. You can scale the prize bubble with the up and down directional buttons if you want to make it a bit bigger. Now tweak the prize bubble with L1 and square. In the menu, find the option for Collectible by Imp. It's very important to turn this off. Otherwise, you could collect all the prize bubbles just by depossessing Connie. Now close the tweak menu with L1 and Circle. To make the score go up, we need another gadget, a score modifier. You can find it next to the score gadget in the Gameplay Gear menu. Select it with X, then stamp one next to the prize bubble. Press Circle to remove the gadget from your imp. Then move on to the next step when you're ready to continue. Right, let's take a closer look at the score modifier. Open the score modifier's tweak menu with L1 and square. The score name box shows which score is being modified. Find the slider called Operation Value. It's down at the bottom. The operation value is how much is added or set by this score modifier. Use the up and down directional buttons to set the operation value to 1.0. 1 point for each prize bubble collected. Next, take a look at the options for operation type. These are very important, as they determine how the score is modified. The default option is Set. This means that when the score modifier is activated, it will set the score to the operation value. So in our case, it'll set the score to 1, no matter what the score was before it was activated. That's no good for a collectible, so we need to change the operation type to Add. Select the button with the plus icon on it. When set to Add, the score modifier will add the operation value to the current score. If you want to know what the other operation types do, just hover over them for a few seconds to reveal more info for that button. And that's our score modifier ready to go. We just need to connect it to the prize bubble. We'll do that in the next step. For this next bit, we'll need the tweak menus for the score modifier and the prize bubble. So make sure you've got them both open. Put the prize bubble tweak menu on the left of the screen and the score modifier on the right. In the prize bubble tweak menu, find the button called Just Collected. Its icon is a tick. Create a wire from the Just Collected output port. Extend the wire over to the score modifier and connect it to its power port. Now when this prize bubble is collected, the score modifier will activate and 1 point will be added to the score. Don't take my word for it, though. A good dream shaper always tests their work. But we'll need more than one collectible set up to test it properly. Now that we've set up one prize bubble and score modifier, we can clone them onto other platforms. Close both tweak menus, then select the gadgets with X. Now group them by selecting the button in the context menu. Now you can clone the collectible with L1 and R2. Don't make too many just yet, just a few to test their working. Once you've got a few collectibles, switch over to play mode and test the logic so far. Great! The score is keeping count of how many prize bubbles Connie has collected. We can now clone more collectibles in edit mode. If your score isn't increasing, check that your score modifier is connected and that it's adding and not setting the score. When you've finished adding collectibles, move on to the next step. Having a score has really upped the game's replayability. But collecting objects isn't the only way to use a score. With the right logic, we could use a score gadget to record fastest times. If you've closed the score logic microchip, open it up again with L1 and X. First, we'll need a new score, so grab one from the Gameplay Gear menu. Stamp it down underneath the first score gadget. To differentiate them, we need to rename this score. Open its tweak menu, then select the title to rename it. I'm calling mine Time. Just like with the first score gadget, we also want to post the score at the finish line. So connect the detected output of the finish line to the post score input. As this is going to record time, we also need to tweak the default scoreboard setting to output of the finish line. I'm calling mine Time. Just like with the first score gadget, we also want to post the score at the finish line. So connect the detected output of the finish line to the post score input. As this is going to record time, we also need to tweak the default scoreboard settings. They can be found on the second page of the menu. First, change the score unit to time. We also need to change the scoreboard order. When ranking times, the lowest scores should be at the top. So select the option for lower, then move the tweak menu to one side. To see the time on screen, we'll need another number displayer. But there's no need to set up a new one from scratch. Just clone the one we made earlier. That way the appearance will match. Clone the number displayer with L1 and R2. Place it next to the time score gadget. To display time, we need to connect the current score to the number displayer input, just like we did before. In the Score Tweak menu, create a wire from the current score output port. Connect the wire to the number range input on the number displayer. Once that's hooked up, You can close the tweak menu of the score and open up the tweak menu for the cloned number displayer. As this number displayer is showing time, we need to tweak it slightly. In display format, select the clock icon to display time. The option Show Milliseconds is now selectable. Turn it on to make the time display even more precise. Use the options on the alignment page of the tweak menu to set the position of the number displayer. The collectible count is in the middle, so how about at the top, on the right? Select the score number displayer with X if you want to preview them on screen together. Looks good. In the next step, we'll create some logic to record the time. To record the time, we can use a timer. Go to the Assembly menu, then select Gadgets. Close Gameplay Gear, then open Logic and Processing. The icon for the timer is a clock. Stamp it on the microchip canvas to the right of the start line trigger zone. Leave a bit of space, as we'll also need to add a counter. This will turn the signal from the trigger zone into a constant signal, so it stays on even after Connie has left the trigger zone's detection area. The counter also lives in the Logic and Processing menu. Select it with X and stamp one between the start line and the timer. If you've played our wiring and logic tutorial, you might already know how to connect up the timer and the counter. But here's a reminder in case you've forgotten. Start by creating a wire from the start line trigger zone's detected port. Connect it to the increase count input of the counter. When Connie crosses the start line, the counter will increase and the counter full port will send a constant signal. The counter full output then connects to the start timer input. This simple bit of logic ensures that the timer will keep on ticking until we tell it to stop. In the next step, we'll tweak the timer. Let's take a look at the timer's tweak menu. Open it up with L1 and square. The timer requires a target time, but we don't want a time limit to complete the scene, so set the target time high enough that the player won't ever reach it. As the platforms disappear after a few seconds, it's impossible for Connie to survive forever. So 120 seconds should be enough time to complete the course. Below the sliders is the timer type. Right now it's set to count up. With this setting selected, the timer will keep counting until it reaches the target time, or until it's turned off. That's no good for recording a fastest time, so change the timer type to the speed setting. Its icon is a curved line. With the speed setting selected, the timer will only count while it's receiving an input signal. This makes it work like a stopwatch and will allow us to record a finish time with it. The timer is all set. Phew, almost there. Who thought logic could be so demanding? Now the time as a score. We'll do that in the next step. To record the finish time, we need another score modifier. Go to the Assembly menu, select Gadgets, then Gameplay Gear. Grab a score modifier and stamp one to the right of the timer. Press circle to unequip the gadget, then open the score modifier tweak menu with L1 and square. In the score name box, select the score you created to record time. Hover over the box and use the up and down directional buttons to scroll through the different scores in the scene. There should only be 2 to choose from. To record the time with the score modifier, we need the timer's tweak menu, so open it up if it isn't already. In the tweak menu, create a wire from the output of the current time slider. Extend the wire over to the score modifier tweak menu, then connect it to the input of the operation value. Now the operation value will be set by the current time of the timer. This time the operation type can be left as set, as we don't need to add the current time to anything. But the update type should be changed to continuously while powered. This means the score modifier will continuously update the score with the current time. Let's test it quickly in play mode. Remember we hooked up a text displayer to the time score. So now that the time score is being modified, we can see it on screen. The only problem is that the time doesn't stop when Connie crosses the finish. So we'll fix that in the final step. The last thing to do is to stop the timer when Connie crosses the finish line. Create a wire from the finish line trigger zone's detected port. Connect it to the reset count input port of the counter gadget. Resetting the counter will stop the signal to the timer. As we set the timer type to the speed setting, stopping the signal will cause the timer to stop counting. I think we're ready to play it. Switch over to play mode and have a go. The timer doesn't stop when you cross the line. you probably need to set the timer type to speed. If you think it's a bit too easy, you could animate the platforms with action recorders to make it trickier. Or you could make some bubbles that are harder to collect, then set the score modifiers on those bubbles to award more points. Have a few goes and see how fast you can collect all the prize bubbles. To finish the tutorial, just select Exit Creation in the Options menu.